We're here in the heart of the Judean desert, about halfway between Jerusalem and Jericho. A dangerous area for human beings in this isolated wilderness with only a few shepherd camps. But just now we're interested in the dangers to animals, to sheep and goats, because in this kind of a desert terrain, there's lack of water and lack of grass. And you need to be able to find out where to find food and water in order to survive. But this is not a trackless wilderness of moving sand dunes. This desert is full of trails and tracks, full of paths. In fact, there are dozens just up and down one hillside because they're just far enough apart so that the sheep and goats can nibble whatever little remnants of grass are there, and that way clean off whatever little food is here on an entire hillside. So if you're a sheep and a goat out here and you're trying to figure out where to find water or grass, which path are you going to take? Not only that, we notice the rounded contours of the chalky hills and how if you get on one of these paths and follow it, you may end up just circling around the whole hilltop and coming back right to where you were. And this is what helps us understand one of the phrases in Psalm 23. Yancheni b'ma'agale tzedek. He will lead me in, standard translation, paths of righteousness. Literal translation doesn't even make sense, in circles of righteousness. But now it does make sense because the kinds of paths that are here in the wilderness sometimes literally circle right around and come back to where they were. And what you're learning from this multitude of confusing, circling paths is how totally dependent the sheep are on the shepherd to find the food and the water. We have to take into account that there can be 8 to 10 months a year here in the Judean desert where there's not a drop of rain. And we are right now in January seeing the desert at its finest in terms of what little tint of green is here from what little rainfall has now fallen in this rainiest month of the year here in the land of Israel. January gets the most rainfall, and so the green that you see now is in just a couple months going to be gone. There'll be little dried wisps of grass, but not really visible until you're right there. In fact, one visitor from the States, Mark Twain, in the 1880s or so, Innocents Abroad, said there's a very special breed of goats in Palestine. They eat gravel. They eat little stones because I don't see anything else out there for them to eat. And that's exactly the way it is. Most of the year you don't see what there is to eat, even though it's here. And this helps us understand a verse in Psalm 23. He makes me lie down in green pastures. No, these are not the lush pastures of Wisconsin or of New Zealand where you don't need a shepherd at all because you just put a fence around this lush green pasture and a little brook runs through. No, this is very different. And you need a shepherd in the midst of all this confusion of winding, circling paths to find where there's a little bit grass left. And actually, what we're seeing here is grass that's growing on the slopes facing toward the north, because there the sun doesn't beat so harshly down most of the year, whereas on the southern slopes that face toward the sun, there's hardly any grass at all, not even now in this most lush time of the year. And so he makes me lie down in rare patches of grass, with that special word in Hebrew, lie down, used only of animals and meaning when they're satiated. And so again, the complete dependence of the sheep on the shepherd. Every year at the time of the Day of Atonement, the sins of the people were symbolically placed on the scapegoat, and it was set loose in the Judean desert with the knowledge that within a day or two or three it would be dead. And the reason is because there's not only a problem out here in the desert to find food and water, there's also danger lurking in these deep ravines. David tells us, "I killed lions and bears that went after my sheep." Now here in the Judean wilderness today, there are no lions and bears left, but there are still leopards. And this now then brings deeper meaning to, though I walk through, now we say valley of the shadow of death, the Hebrew word is more specific, through the ravine, the steep-sided, winding, twisting, turning, where there are shadows even at middle of the day. Even though I walk down some dark ravine and I don't know what's around the next corner where I could be killed, I will fear no evil because you are with me. And that's how the sheep was dependent on the shepherd, not just for food and water, but for protection against enemies. In Psalm 23, it says, "He leads me by the still waters." We've had Bible translators who have told us we can't say that because still, quiet water means malarial swamps. And so they've even opted to translate, "He leads me by the good waters." If we look carefully at the Hebrew, "Al mei menuchot yenahaleni," along restful waters, he will lead me. And the issue is two, because one is, where in the world are you going to find water in the desert? It doesn't take more than a few hours in the desert to realize how totally scarce it is and how dependent you'd be on the shepherd to find where there might be some source of water. Because down here on the outskirts of Jericho, we can see the oasis that is a result of a rich spring of water. Rain that fell in the hills up in Jerusalem and north of Jerusalem seeps down thousands of feet and comes out as a rich spring of water year around. But between the Jericho spring and Jerusalem is this rain shadow desert, and it's only in a few deep canyons where the erosion has cut down deep enough to expose that deep level where the water is seeping along, and there are occasional springs, even in the desert. And if you don't have a shepherd to find that rare spring of water, or if you don't have a shepherd who has dug a hole where he can catch winter rain, a cistern, and pull the water up to water the sheep, then you're just not going to survive. The importance of water in the desert is emphasized by what we're seeing right here, this quiet, restful water flowing in an aqueduct from the time of Jesus. And when you think of what tremendous effort it took to build an aqueduct for miles from a spring way up in a desert canyon and to bring it through this aqueduct down into the desert oasis of Jericho, it just emphasizes once more the importance of water in the desert, and in Psalm 23, the importance of the shepherd, the total dependence of the sheep on the shepherd for water, for food, and for protection.